A single dad found a woman living in a dumpster, but when she revealed what she was holding, it shattered everything he thought he knew about his dead son. Could this stranger be holding the key to the biggest miracle of his life, or the cruelest lie of all? Before we get into the story, comment below where in the world you are watching from today. The autumn wind whipped through the narrow alley behind Jack Reynolds' diner, carrying the familiar scents of fried chicken and apple pie. Country music drifted softly from the kitchen radio as Jack methodically wiped down the well-worn counter, his movements practiced after 20 years of the same nightly routine. "Almost done here," he murmured to himself, tossing the damp cloth into a bucket. The empty diner felt peaceful at this hour, the red vinyl booths gleaming under dim lights, yesterday's coffee grounds still giving off a faint aroma. Jack glanced at his watch. 10:45 p.m. Sarah, his teenage daughter, would be wondering where he was. She always waited up for him, no matter how many times he told her not to. That was Sarah, though, stubborn and protective, just like her mother had been. Gathering the day's trash, Jack pushed open the heavy back door with his shoulder. The metal hinges creaked in protest, a sound that usually marked the end of another long workday. But tonight was different. As he approached the dumpster, a distinct rustling sound made him pause. His first thought was raccoons. They'd been a constant nuisance lately. But this sound was different, more deliberate, human. Jack's grip tightened on the trash bag as he edged closer. "Hello?" he called out, his voice firm despite the uncertainty churning in his stomach. "Someone there?" More rustling, followed by a sharp intake of breath. A figure emerged from behind the dumpster. A woman, her dark hair matted and tangled, clothes hanging loose on her thin frame. Her eyes darted around like a trapped animal's, never quite meeting his. Jack's initial concern shifted to frustration. He'd dealt with dumpster divers before, though not often in their small town. "Ma'am, this is private property. I'm going to have to ask you to leave." The woman clutched something to her chest, wrapped in what looked like old newspaper. Jack's police officer training from years ago kicked in, making him instantly wary. "Show me what you're holding," he demanded, taking a step closer. She backed away, shaking her head. "Please," she whispered, her voice hoarse. "I'm not stealing anything. I need to find him." "Find who?" Jack's hand instinctively moved toward his phone. "Look, I don't want any trouble, but if you don't—" "The baby," she interrupted, her words tumbling out faster now. "The one this belonged to." Before Jack could respond, she unwrapped the bundle she was holding. It wasn't newspaper at all, but fabric, a baby blanket, old and worn but clearly once well loved. Even in the dim light from the back door, he could make out the delicate embroidery along one edge. Jack's world tilted sideways. There, in familiar blue thread, was a name he hadn't allowed himself to say aloud in years. Ethan. The sight of those 5 simple letters sent him reeling. His ears began to ring, drowning out the country music still playing inside. That blanket, he knew every thread, every worn patch. His late wife Caroline had spent months working on it during her pregnancy, determined their son would have something handmade with love. "Where?" Jack's voice cracked. He cleared his throat and tried again. "Where did you get that?" The woman hugged the blanket closer. "You know this blanket?" Jack's legs felt unsteady. He reached out to steady himself against the dumpster, the metal cool under his palm. "That's impossible," he muttered, more to himself than to her. "That blanket was buried. With my son." The woman's eyes widened. In the glow of the security light, Jack could see tears forming. "Your son?" she whispered. "Ethan was your son?" The use of his boy's name hit Jack like a physical blow. Memories he'd locked away came flooding back. The soft weight of a newborn in his arms, Caroline's radiant smile, the devastating call from the hospital just days later. The funeral with a tiny casket that no parent should ever have to see. "My son died," Jack said, his voice hollow. 15 years ago, in the hospital." But even as he spoke the words, doubt crept in. The blanket looked exactly like the one Caroline had made. The precise shade of blue, the slightly crooked T that had always bothered her, the tiny heart she'd added in the corner. The woman shook her head, tears now flowing freely down her cheeks. "No," she whispered. "No, he didn't." Jack stumbled backward, his whole body trembling. The night air felt thick and heavy, making it hard to breathe. His eyes remained fixed on the blanket, the impossible blanket that shouldn't exist, couldn't exist. The woman stood frozen, clutching it like a lifeline, while questions exploded in Jack's mind like fireworks. How could she have this? Where did she get it? And most terrifying of all, what did she mean, saying his son hadn't died? The country song inside the diner faded to static, but Jack barely noticed. All he could see was that blanket, and all he could hear was his own heart pounding in his ears, drowning out everything else in the world except those 5 embroidered letters that had just shattered everything he thought he knew. Jack's flashlight beam cut through the darkness, illuminating the woman's face. She squinted and raised a trembling hand to shield her eyes, pressing the bundle even tighter against her chest with her other arm. In the harsh light, he could see she was younger than he'd first thought, maybe late 20s, with dark circles under her eyes that spoke of countless, sleepless nights. "Please," she whispered, her voice hoarse but surprisingly gentle. "My name is Marissa. Don't call the police. I'm not doing anything wrong." Jack's hand shook slightly as he kept the light trained on her. The name Ethan on that blanket had rattled him more than he wanted to admit. "You're digging through my dumpster at midnight. Give me one good reason why I shouldn't call them right now." "Because I'm looking for someone," Marissa said. She slowly unwrapped the blanket, treating it like it was made of glass. "This blanket, it belonged to a baby I once cared for, a little boy named Ethan." Jack's throat went dry. "That's impossible. He had a tiny birthmark," Marissa continued, her words tumbling out faster now. "Right behind his left ear, shape of a crescent moon. And he wouldn't fall asleep unless someone hummed, 'You are my sunshine.'" The flashlight beam wavered as Jack's hand dropped slightly. Nobody knew about that birthmark except immediate family, and that lullaby his wife Sarah had sung it every night before she passed. "How do you?" His voice cracked. "You're lying. My son died. Years ago." Marissa shook her head, clutching the blanket like a lifeline. "No, please listen. I worked at St. Mary's Hospital back then, in the nursery. There was a mistake, a terrible mistake. I've been trying to make it right ever since." Jack's heart hammered against his ribs. The world seemed to tilt beneath his feet as long-buried memories crashed over him. The chaos of that night, the doctor's grim faces, the devastating news that had shattered his world. But there had been something odd about how they wouldn't let him see the body, how quickly everything had been handled. "You expect me to believe." He stopped, studying her face for any sign of deception. But all he saw was raw desperation, and something that looked unsettlingly like hope. After a long moment, Jack lowered the flashlight. "Come inside." "What?" "You look half-starved, and we need to talk." He gestured toward the diner's back door. "I've got food. Real food. Not whatever you've been finding out here." Marissa hesitated, then slowly stood up. Her clothes were worn but clean, and she carried herself with a quiet dignity despite her circumstances. She followed Jack into the warm kitchen, still holding the blanket close. Jack moved behind the grill, his hands working on autopilot as he cracked eggs into a pan and dropped bread into the toaster. The familiar motions helped steady him as his mind raced with questions he wasn't sure he wanted answered. Marissa perched tentatively on a stool at the counter, looking ready to bolt at any sudden movement. When Jack set a plate of eggs, toast, and bacon in front of her, her eyes welled with tears. "Thank you," she whispered, then began eating with the careful restraint of someone who hadn't had a proper meal in days, but was trying not to show it. Jack couldn't take his eyes off the blanket she'd laid beside her plate. The blue fabric was faded and worn thin in places, but the embroidered name was still clear. Ethan. Sarah had stayed up late working on that blanket while she was pregnant, determined to finish it before their son arrived. The precise stitching had always amazed him. His wife's hands had been so steady, even in her final months. "That blanket," he said finally. "Where did you really get it?" Marissa swallowed her bite of toast. "From the hospital nursery. The night everything went wrong." Her fingers traced the embroidered letters. I've kept it safe all these years, hoping it would help me find him again. Find you both." Jack gripped the edge of the counter, his knuckles white. Part of him wanted to throw her out, call the police, forget this night had ever happened. It would be easier than facing the possibility that his entire world could be built on a lie. But another part, the part that still ached with a father's love, couldn't let go of the things she knew, the tiny details that no stranger could have guessed. "Tell me everything," he said quietly. "Start from the beginning." As Marissa spoke, between careful bites of food, Jack found himself caught between disbelief and that dangerous spark of hope he thought he'd extinguished years ago. The blanket lay between them on the counter like a bridge between past and present, between loss and possibility, between the life he'd accepted and one he'd never dared to imagine might still exist. The early morning sun cast long shadows across Jack's living room as he paced back and forth, the tattered blanket trembling in his weathered hands. Each step creaked against the old hardwood floors, marking time like a metronome as his mind raced with possibilities. Lily appeared at the bottom of the stairs in her pajamas, her dark hair messy from sleep. She froze at the sight of her father's distress. "Dad? What's wrong?" Jack stopped pacing, looking up at his daughter with red-rimmed eyes. "Did I wake you, sweetheart? I'm sorry. You've been walking circles since before dawn." Lily moved closer, her eyes fixed on the fabric in his hands. "What's that?" Jack sank into his favorite armchair, the one that still held the indent of countless nights spent reading to his children. "Something impossible." His voice cracked. "It's Ethan's blanket." Lily's eyes widened. She knelt beside the chair, reaching out to touch the worn fabric. Her fingers traced the embroidered name, Ethan, in faded blue thread. But how? A woman had it, behind the diner last night. Jack's words tumbled out as he described finding Marissa, the strange conversation that followed, and how he'd let her sleep in the diner's back office overnight. "She says things about him, Lily. Things nobody else could know. Where is she now?" Lily's voice carried an urgency that matched the hope flickering in her eyes. "Still at the diner. I locked up, told her to stay put until I figured out what to do." Jack rubbed his face. "I must be crazy letting a stranger—" "We have to talk to her," Lily interrupted, already heading for the stairs. "Give me 5 minutes to change." "Lily, wait. Dad!" She turned, her expression serious beyond her 16 years. "If there's even a chance this has something to do with Ethan, we have to know." 20 minutes later, they pulled into the diner's parking lot. Jack used his key to unlock the side door, leading Lily to the small office where he'd left Marissa. They found her curled up on the old couch, still clutching the blanket even in sleep. Lily's presence seemed to put Marissa at ease as they moved to the diner's main room. Jack prepared a proper breakfast while Marissa sat at the counter, answering Lily's gentle questions between bites of scrambled eggs and toast. "The blanket was all I had left," Marissa explained, her voice soft. "After everything fell apart, I couldn't let go of it." Lily reached across the counter and squeezed Marissa's hand. "You must have been so scared." Jack watched the interaction, noting how Marissa's shoulders relaxed slightly at his daughter's kindness. There was something in the woman's demeanor that didn't match his initial fears about her. No signs of drug use, no aggressive behavior, just a deep, wounded vulnerability. "We should take you to social services," Jack said, trying to keep his voice gentle. "They can help us figure this out. Maybe access records about what happened back then." Fear flickered across Marissa's face, but she nodded slowly. "Okay. If you'll come with me?" "Of course we will," Lily answered before Jack could respond. She shot her father a look that brooked no argument. The social services office was housed in a gray government building downtown. Inside, fluorescent lights buzzed overhead as they waited in plastic chairs. Lily sat between Jack and Marissa, holding both their hands. Finally, a worker called them back to a small office. The questions started simple enough: name, date of birth, current address. But when the worker began digging deeper, asking about Marissa's history, her previous addresses, her record, the woman began to shake. "I can't," Marissa whispered, her eyes darting to the door. "I'm sorry, I can't." "Miss Coleman, we need to establish—" The worker's voice was drowned out by the scraping of Marissa's chair as she bolted to her feet. "Marissa, wait!" Lily called, but the woman was already running. Jack started after her, but by the time he reached the building's entrance, Marissa had vanished into the morning crowd. He searched the nearby streets for nearly an hour, Lily helping him check alleyways and shop doorways, but there was no sign of her. The drive home was silent, heavy with disappointment. Lily kept looking back over her shoulder, as if hoping to spot Marissa following them. Now, as the sun sank toward the horizon, Jack stood at his living room window. The blanket lay on the coffee table behind him, its presence both a comfort and a torment. He watched shadows lengthen across his front yard, remembering how sure he'd been about everything this morning. Sure that Marissa was trouble, sure that social services would help, sure that the mystery would have a simple explanation. "Do you think she's really gone?" Lily asked from the couch, her voice small. Jack turned from the window, looking at his daughter's worried face. The same doubt and hope he felt were mirrored in her expression. He opened his mouth to answer, to say that, yes, Marissa was probably long gone, that it was better this way, that they should try to forget about the whole strange episode. But he couldn't form the words. Something deep in his gut told him this wasn't the end, that whatever had brought Marissa Coleman and Ethan's blanket into their lives wasn't finished with them yet. He stared back out the window as the last rays of sunlight painted the sky in shades of orange and purple, watching as day faded into dusk. The church bells chimed softly across Main Street as Jack and Lily made their way up the worn stone steps of First Presbyterian. Jack tugged at his collar, uncomfortable in the suit he wore only on Sundays. The morning air was crisp, carrying the scent of fresh-cut grass and late spring flowers from the church garden. "You okay, Dad?" Lily touched his arm, her blue eyes studying his face. She looked so much like her mother in her flowered dress, her dark hair pulled back with a ribbon. "Just tired, sweetheart." Jack managed a weak smile. 3 days had passed since Marissa's disappearance, but the image of that blanket, Ethan's blanket, haunted his every waking moment. Inside, the familiar scents of old wood and leather-bound hymnals wrapped around them. Mrs. Peterson's fingers danced across the organ keys as the congregation filed in. Jack and Lily slipped into their usual pew, 3rd row from the back, where Sarah used to say they could see everyone but still make a quick escape if needed. The choir began their first hymn, "Amazing Grace," voices rising to the vaulted ceiling. Jack closed his eyes, trying to lose himself in the melody, but his thoughts kept drifting to Marissa. Where was she now? What else did she know about Ethan? A sudden movement beside him made him open his eyes. Lily was rigid in her seat, staring toward the stained glass windows. "Dad," she whispered, clutching his sleeve. "Look." Through the colored glass, a familiar figure huddled on the church steps. Marissa sat with her knees drawn up, wearing the same worn jacket from the diner. In her hands, she held what looked like a piece of paper, crumpled and smoothed out repeatedly. "I'm going out there," Lily announced in a whisper. "Lily, wait." But she was already sliding past him, quiet as a shadow. Jack watched through the windows as his daughter approached Marissa. The two women, one barely more than a girl, the other, broken by life, spoke in hushed tones. His heart clenched as he saw Marissa wipe tears from her cheeks. Lily extended her hand, and after a long moment, Marissa took it. The side door creaked as they entered. A few heads turned, but most were focused on Reverend Matthew's sermon about faith in times of trial. Jack's hands gripped the back of the pew as Lily guided Marissa to sit beside them. "Show him," Lily whispered, nodding at the paper in Marissa's trembling hands. Marissa hesitated, then slowly passed the letter to Jack. The letterhead bore the logo of St. Mary's Hospital. The paper was worn thin at the creases, as if it had been folded and unfolded countless times. The date at the top made his breath catch. May 15th, 15 years ago. The night everything changed. "Dear Miss Coleman," the letter began. Jack's eyes skimmed over formal language about reviewing records and internal investigation until they landed on words that made his world tilt sideways. "Regarding the events of May 15th, in the neonatal intensive care unit, Our review has uncovered irregularities in the identification protocols during the night shift, specifically between 11 p.m. and 2 a.m. 2 infants were temporarily placed in incorrect bassinets during this time frame. The hymnal slipped from Jack's lap, hitting the floor with a dull thud. The room seemed to spin. He gripped the pew harder, his knuckles white. "Keep reading," Marissa whispered, her voice barely audible over the organ music. While standard procedures were eventually followed, we cannot definitively confirm. Jack's vision blurred. The possibility exists that infant identification bracelets may have been. He couldn't finish. Lily leaned close, reading over his shoulder. "Dad," she breathed. "This means, it means they made a mistake." Marissa's words came out in a rush, like she'd been holding them in for years. "The night they told you Ethan didn't make it, there was another baby, another boy, born just hours apart. They got mixed up, and when one of them," she swallowed hard, "when one of them didn't survive, they thought." The letter trembled in Jack's hands. The congregation stood for another hymn, but he remained seated, the words on the page burning into his mind. All these years, he'd visited an empty grave. All these years, while somewhere out there. "How did you get this?" he managed to ask. "I worked as a volunteer in the hospital records department years ago." Marissa stared at her worn shoes. "I found it by accident, buried in old files. I've been trying to trace both families ever since, but then life." She gestured vaguely at herself, her shabby clothes. Life got complicated. The organ swelled with the final chorus. Sunlight streamed through the stained glass, casting rainbow patterns across the letter that had shattered 15 years of grief. Jack's mind raced with questions, with hope, with terror. Could it be true? Could Ethan really be alive? He folded the letter carefully, his hands shaking so badly he could barely manage the creases. The congregation bowed their heads for the closing prayer, and Jack found himself whispering his own desperate words. "Please," he breathed, barely aware he was speaking aloud. "Please, if this is real, if my boy is out there somewhere, help me find the strength, help me know what to do." But even as he prayed, doubt crept in like shadows at sunset. What if it was all a cruel mistake? What if hoping again only led to more heartbreak? The letter felt impossibly heavy in his hands, weighted with both promise and pain. The afternoon sun cast long shadows through Jack's kitchen windows as he unlocked his front door, Marissa hesitating on the worn welcome mat. Her thin frame seemed to shrink even smaller under the scrutiny of the neat suburban home. "Come on in," Jack said, his voice gentle but uncertain. "Kitchen's this way." Before Marissa could take 2 steps inside, a sharp knock rattled the screen door. Jack's sister Barbara burst in, her face tight with concern. "Jack Reynolds, have you lost your mind?" Barbara's voice carried through the house. She stood with her hands on her hips, designer purse dangling from her elbow. "I just heard from Sarah at church that you're bringing a—" She paused, eyeing Marissa. "A stranger into your home. Barb, please." Jack's tone held a warning. "This is Marissa. She has information about Ethan." "Ethan?" Barbara's face softened for a moment before hardening again. "Jack, we buried Ethan. This is crazy. You can't just let someone off the street." "She's staying," Lily announced, appearing at the top of the stairs. "Dad and I both decided." Barbara threw her hands up. "You're both being reckless. What would Claire think?" Jack flinched at the mention of his late wife's name. "Claire would want us to show kindness," he said quietly, "just like she always did." Marissa stood silently through the exchange, her fingers working the frayed edges of her sleeve. "I can go," she whispered. "I don't want to cause trouble." "No," Jack said firmly. "Barbara, either join us for coffee or leave, but Marissa stays." Barbara's mouth opened and closed before she grabbed her purse tighter. "Don't say I didn't warn you." The screen door slammed behind her. In the kitchen, Jack brewed coffee, while Lily helped Marissa settle at their oak table. The familiar routine of measuring grounds and heating water helped steady his nerves. "I work nights," Marissa began softly, wrapping her hands around the steaming mug Jack placed before her. "Cleaning the hospital corridors, emptying trash bins. Nobody really notices the cleaning staff. We're like ghosts." Jack pulled out a chair, its legs scraping against linoleum. How long were you there? 3 years. Started in 2007. Her eyes grew distant. That night, the night of the mix-up, I was cleaning near the NICU. There was confusion, lots of rushing around. 2 babies, both having breathing problems. I heard the nurses later, whispering about wrong name tags, wrong bassinets. Lily leaned forward. Why didn't you tell someone right away? Marissa's fingers tightened around her mug. I did. I told Marcus, my boyfriend, then. He said I was imagining things, that I should keep quiet. Her voice dropped. When I pushed back, he got angry, started hitting me, said I'd lose my job if I caused trouble. Jack's jaw clenched. The coffee in his cup suddenly tasted bitter. I lost everything anyway, Marissa continued. Marcus took what money I had. I couldn't pay rent. Started sleeping in my car until they towed it. She pulled out the crumpled hospital letter. But I held on to this, found it in the trash near administration. It mentions an incident report about infant identification errors that night. Through the kitchen window, Jack spotted Mrs. Henderson from next door, slowing her walk to peer at his house. She'd already called twice that morning, asking if he needed help with that situation. People are talking, he said heavily. They think I'm being foolish. Maybe we are, Lily said. But maybe that's okay sometimes. She reached across the table and squeezed Marissa's hand. The simple gesture brought tears to Marissa's eyes. They spent the afternoon sorting through old photos. Marissa correctly identified details about the NICU that only someone who worked there would know. She remembered the mint green walls, the squeak in the door of room 204, the night nurse who always hummed hymns. As evening settled in, Jack ordered pizza. They ate in the living room, Marissa taking small, careful bites, as if afraid the food might disappear. Lily showed her to the guest room upstairs, lending her clean pajamas and a towel for the shower. Later that night, unable to sleep, Jack padded downstairs for water. He paused at the soft sound of crying from the living room. Marissa knelt by the window, moonlight silvering her tears. Please, God, she whispered, unaware of Jack's presence. I know I've made so many mistakes. I know I don't deserve their kindness. But please, help me make things right. Help me find Ethan. Not for me, I don't ask anything for me, but for them. For this family that's hurting. Jack stood frozen in the shadows, his heart twisting. Part of him wanted to believe her completely, to embrace the hope she offered. Another part whispered warnings about trust and caution. He thought of Claire, of her unwavering faith in people's goodness. He thought of Ethan, of the tiny grave he'd visited every Sunday for years. Marissa's prayer continued, her voice breaking. And Lord, if I'm wrong about all of this, if I've brought them pain instead of healing, please forgive me. Just, please don't let them lose their faith because of me. Jack slipped back upstairs without his water, her words echoing in his mind. In his bedroom, he sat on the edge of his bed, head in his hands. The rational part of him said this was madness, taking in a stranger, believing in impossible stories. But something deeper, something that felt like Claire's gentle touch on his shoulder, whispered that sometimes faith meant walking forward even when the path seemed foolish to others. Outside, crickets chirped their evening song, and somewhere in the distance, a train whistle cut through the darkness. Jack listened to the familiar sounds of his home, now changed by the presence of someone who might hold the key to his greatest loss or his greatest disappointment. The morning light filtered through the kitchen curtains, casting a warm glow across the wooden table where Jack, Lily, and Marissa sat sharing a simple breakfast of scrambled eggs and toast. The kitchen still smelled of fresh coffee, and the quiet clink of forks against plates filled the awkward silence. Marissa pushed her eggs around her plate, gathering courage. I've been thinking, she said softly, her voice barely above a whisper. Maybe we could look into the hospital records together. Jack's fork froze halfway to his mouth. His heart skipped a beat as memories of that terrible night flooded back. The beeping machines, the doctors' grim faces, the devastating news that had shattered his world. Lily looked between them, her teenage face filled with concern. Dad? Jack set his fork down carefully, his hands trembling slightly. Those records are probably sealed. And even if they weren't, he couldn't finish the sentence. I know someone, Marissa said, straightening in her chair. A nurse who worked there that night. Margaret Hughes. She retired last year, but she knows things, Jack. Things the hospital wanted to keep quiet. Jack stood abruptly, walking to the sink to hide the emotion on his face. He gripped the counter edge until his knuckles turned white. You don't understand what you're asking. I spent years trying to move past this. Dad, Lily said gently. What if Marissa's right? What if Ethan's really out there? The morning sunlight caught the dust motes dancing in the air as Jack stood there, frozen between hope and fear. The clock on the wall ticked loudly in the silence. Please, Marissa's voice cracked. I wouldn't bring this up if I wasn't certain. Margaret, she told me once, when I was cleaning her ward, about a terrible mistake. She's been carrying that guilt for years. Jack turned slowly, studying Marissa's face. The desperation in her eyes matched the ache in his own heart. Where does Margaret live? 20 minutes later, they pulled up to a small, yellow house with perfectly tended flower beds. Margaret Hughes's home looked exactly like what you'd expect from a retired nurse. Neat, orderly, with everything in its place. Jack's hand shook as he rang the doorbell. A woman in her late 60s answered, her silver hair neatly styled, wearing a cardigan despite the warm morning. Her eyes widened when she saw Marissa. I wondered if you'd come, Margaret said, her voice tired but kind. Both of you. Inside, Margaret's living room was filled with family photos and medical awards. She gestured for them to sit on her floral sofa while she settled into a worn armchair. I remember that night, Margaret began without preamble, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. 2 babies, both in distress. The power went out briefly during the storm, when the backup generators kicked in. She closed her eyes, pain etching lines around her mouth. Everything was chaos. The ID bracelets. There was confusion. Jack leaned forward, his heart pounding. What are you saying? I'm saying there was a terrible mistake. Margaret's voice grew firm. One I've regretted not reporting properly for years. The hospital. They knew something wasn't right, but they covered it up. Changed records. Threatened to fire anyone who spoke up. Marissa reached for Jack's hand instinctively. He was surprised to find himself gripping it back, needing the anchor. I tried to hint at it over the years, Margaret continued. But who would believe a nurse over hospital administration? They made sure all the paperwork looked perfect. She stood, walking to a cabinet, and pulled out a thick manila envelope. But I kept copies. Notes, records of which babies were where before and after the power outage. Jack's vision blurred as Margaret spread the papers on her coffee table. Birth records, nurses' notes, shift changes, all pointing to one impossible truth. The baby they told you died, Margaret said softly, was moved to a different room during the confusion. Another infant. One who, she glanced at Marissa, one who actually passed away, was mistakenly identified as your son. The room spun. Jack felt Lily's hand on his shoulder, steadying him. Why? He managed to choke out. Why are you telling us this now? Margaret's eyes filled with tears. Because I'm tired of carrying this secret, and because if you're here, asking these questions, maybe there's finally a chance to make it right. She turned to Marissa. You worked in that hospital. You knew something wasn't right too, didn't you? Marissa nodded, her voice thick with emotion. I found documents while cleaning the records room. That's why I started looking. That's why I kept the blanket all these years. You'll face opposition, Margaret warned, gathering the papers back into the envelope. The hospital will fight this. They'll try to discredit you both. Me too, probably. Are you prepared for that? Jack stood, his legs steady now, his purpose clear. The morning light streamed through Margaret's windows, illuminating the dust motes like tiny stars. He looked at Marissa, seeing not the homeless woman from behind his diner, but a partner in this impossible journey. If Ethan's alive, he said firmly, we're going to find him. The fluorescent lights of yet another government office buzzed overhead as Jack, Marissa, and Lily waited in hard plastic chairs. A clock ticked loudly on the wall, marking their 3rd hour of waiting. Jack's coffee had gone cold in its paper cup, but he hardly noticed. His eyes were fixed on the stack of forms in his lap, each one a potential piece of the puzzle that might lead them to Ethan. Lily slouched in her chair, tapping away at her phone. "Dad, this is the 4th office this week," she sighed. "Maybe we should try a different approach." Marissa sat quietly between them, her hands folded in her lap. She wore clean clothes now, a simple blouse and jeans that the church had provided. But she still carried herself with the cautious air of someone used to being overlooked. "Your daughter's right," Marissa said softly. "These agencies, they don't always talk to each other. But I remember something from when I worked at the hospital. There was a social worker, Mrs. Chen. She handled difficult cases." Jack straightened in his chair. "Do you think she might remember anything about Ethan's case?" "It's worth a try," Marissa nodded. "She was kind to me, always left coffee for the night staff." The next day found them in Mrs. Chen's small office at the county social services building. The elderly social worker's eyes widened with recognition when she saw Marissa. "I remember you, Mrs. Chen said, adjusting her glasses. "You used to work the night shift." Her eyes shifted to Jack. "And you, Reynolds, the diner owner. I remember your case too." Jack's heart jumped. "Then you know about my son?" Mrs. Chen's expression softened. "Give me a moment." She turned to her computer, fingers flying over the keyboard. "There was an internal investigation that year. Several cases were problematic. Hours of searching turned into days." Jack kept the diner running, but his mind was elsewhere. Every free moment was spent making calls, following leads, or poring over documents with Marissa and Lily. One afternoon, Lily sat cross-legged on their living room floor, sorting through paperwork. Marissa sat nearby in an armchair, her eyes closed in prayer. "What are you saying?" Lily asked, curious. Marissa opened her eyes. "Just a small prayer my grandmother taught me. Lord, light the path through darkness, guide our steps toward hope." Lily scooted closer. "Could you teach me?" Jack watched from the kitchen doorway as Marissa gently taught his daughter the prayer. There was something about her, a quiet strength, a genuine kindness that seemed to shine through despite everything she'd been through. He'd noticed it more and more lately, how she always made sure Lily ate lunch, how she remembered everyone's coffee preferences at the diner, how she slipped extra napkins to messy toddlers with a warm smile. But not everyone saw what he saw. The whispers around town grew louder with each passing day. "Reynolds has lost his mind," he overheard Mrs. Patterson say at the grocery store. "Letting that homeless woman live in his house? With his teenage daughter?" "He's always been soft-hearted," Mr. Turner replied. "But this is reckless charity if you ask me." The rumors reached a peak when they finally found something concrete. A foster care placement record from 10 years ago, matching the timeline of Ethan's supposed death. That evening, the diner was full of regulars. Jack stood behind the counter, his hands shaking slightly as he held the document. Marissa sat at the end of the counter, trying to make herself invisible as curious eyes darted her way. "Folks," Jack called out, his voice steady despite his nerves. "I've got something to say." The usual dinner chatter died down. All eyes turned to him. "Most of you know about my son, Ethan." His voice caught slightly on the name. "For 10 years I thought he was dead. But now," he gestured to Marissa. "Thanks to this lady here, I've learned there might have been a mistake at the hospital. We've found evidence that my boy might be alive, in foster care." The diner erupted in murmurs. Old Joe, who'd been coming in for coffee every morning for 20 years, stood up. "Jack, son, are you sure about this?" "Getting your hopes up." "I know it sounds crazy," Jack acknowledged. "But Marissa has been helping me search. We've found records, talked to people who remember what happened." Betty, the retired schoolteacher, reached over and squeezed his hand. "If there's even a chance, Jack, you have to try." But across the diner, faces showed doubt. Tom Miller, the bank manager, shook his head. "Jack, you're letting this woman fill your head with false hopes. Think about Lily." "I am thinking about Lily," Jack replied firmly. "I'm thinking about both my children." The diner divided itself almost instantly, half the customers nodding in support, the other half exchanging worried glances and disapproving looks. The line had been drawn, and Jack knew there was no going back now. Through it all, Marissa sat quietly, her eyes fixed on her clasped hands. But when Jack glanced her way, he saw not shame in her expression, but a quiet determination that matched his own. Margaret Hughes pulled Jack aside after church, her weathered hands trembling as she pressed a small piece of paper into his palm. "I know someone at the medical testing lab," she whispered, glancing around to make sure no one was watching. "They do DNA work. Tell them I sent you." Jack stared at the paper, his heart thumping against his ribs. The name Dr. Sarah Chen was written in Margaret's neat nurse's handwriting, along with a phone number. "Thank you," he managed to say, his voice thick with emotion. Margaret squeezed his arm. "Just be prepared, Jack, whatever the results show." Her eyes were kind, but serious. "And don't mention my name to anyone else." Back at the diner, Jack found Marissa wiping down tables with careful attention. She'd insisted on helping out, despite his protests. Every morning, she arrived before dawn to sweep the floors and polish the windows until they sparkled. "Marissa," he called softly. She looked up, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. "I think I found a way to get the DNA test done." Her eyes widened. "Really?" The cleaning rag dropped from her fingers. "But how? The official channels all said we needed court orders. Or, Margaret knows someone." Jack pulled out the paper. "A lab technician who might help us." Lily burst through the diner door, still in her church dress. "Dad, did Margaret give you something? I saw her talking to you after service." Her face was flushed with excitement. Jack nodded, unable to keep from smiling at his daughter's enthusiasm. "We might have a chance now, sweetheart." The next few days passed in a blur of nervous energy. Dr. Chen agreed to help them, moved by their story and Margaret's recommendation. The hard part was getting access to Ethan's records. But Marissa's persistent phone calls to the foster care office finally paid off. They discovered a medical file containing a previous DNA swab taken during a routine health screening. "It's like God keeps opening doors," Marissa whispered one evening as they sat in the diner after closing. Her fingers absently traced the pattern on Ethan's blanket, which she kept carefully folded in her bag. Jack watched her, noticing how her face had filled out since she'd started staying with them. The hollow look in her eyes was fading, replaced by something softer, more hopeful. "Maybe he does," he replied quietly. Lily spent hours researching DNA testing online, explaining the process to anyone who would listen. "It usually takes about 3 to 5 days, she announced at breakfast. "But sometimes it can be faster. Or slower," Jack reminded her gently, not wanting her hopes to soar too high. The waiting was excruciating. Jack found himself unable to sleep, lying awake in the dark, remembering the day they told him his son had died. Had it all been a mistake? A terrible mix-up that shattered multiple lives? During those restless nights, he often heard Marissa's quiet prayers drifting from the guest room. Her faith never wavered, even when his own felt paper-thin. The diner became spotless under Marissa's constant attention. She scrubbed and organized with almost desperate energy, as if keeping her hands busy could make time move faster. The regular customers noticed the change, commenting on how the place gleamed. "That girl's a hard worker." Old Joe, their longtime breakfast regular, remarked one morning. "Maybe we were too quick to judge." Lily threw herself into planning. "When Ethan comes home," she'd say, "he can have the room next to mine, and I'll teach him all about cars like Dad taught me." Jack would just nod, his throat too tight to speak. He wanted to tell her not to plan too far ahead, but he couldn't bear to dampen her joy. 3 days passed. 4. 5. Every time the phone rang, all 3 of them jumped. On the 6th night, Jack sat at his kitchen table, a cold cup of coffee in front of him. Marissa was reading her worn Bible in the living room, and Lily had finally gone to bed after staying up late 2 nights in a row. The phone rang. Jack's hand shook as he reached for it. Marissa appeared in the doorway, her face pale. Lily's footsteps thundered down the stairs. "Hello?" Jack's voice cracked. Dr. Chen's voice came through clearly. "Mr. Reynolds? I have your results." Time seemed to stop. Jack could hear his own heartbeat, feel Lily's hand gripping his arm, see Marissa's lips moving in silent prayer. "It's a match." The words hit him like a physical force. His knees gave out, and he sank to the floor, phone still pressed to his ear. Tears blurred his vision as Dr. Pander Chen continued speaking, explaining percentages and certainties, but all he could hear was those three words echoing in his mind. It's a match. It's a match. It's a match. His son was alive. The morning sun painted golden streaks across the windshield as Jack's pickup truck wound through quiet suburban streets. His hands gripped the steering wheel so tight his knuckles turned white. In the passenger seat, Marissa fidgeted with the hem of her newly borrowed blouse, a gift from the church donation box. Lily sat between them, clutching a worn family photo album to her chest. "Turn left here, Dad," Lily said softly, checking the address on her phone. Cedar Grove Foster Home should be just ahead. The building looked ordinary enough, a large two-story house with cream-colored siding and blue shutters. Bright flowers lined the walkway, and a basketball hoop stood in the driveway. But to Jack, it might as well have been the gates of heaven itself. "Remember what the social worker said," Marissa reminded them gently. "We can't overwhelm him. He doesn't know who we are yet." Jack nodded, trying to steady his breathing. "Right, we're just visiting." They walked up to the front door together, their footsteps seeming impossibly loud on the concrete path. Before Jack could ring the doorbell, the door swung open. A kind-faced woman in her 50s greeted them with a warm smile. "You must be the Reynolds family," she said. "I'm Mrs. Baker. Ethan's been asking about you all morning." Jack's heart skipped a beat at the name. Mrs. Baker led them through a tidy living room where a few other children were playing board games. And there, sitting alone by the window with a book, was a small boy with dark, curly hair. He looked up as they entered, and Jack felt the air leave his lungs. Those eyes, they were Sarah's eyes, the same warm brown that had captured his heart 20 years ago. The same eyes he'd thought he'd lost forever. "Ethan," Mrs. Baker called softly, "these are the people I told you about. Would you like to say hello?" The boy stood up slowly, marking his place in the book with careful precision. He approached them with cautious steps, studying each face with intelligent curiosity. When he reached them, he gave a shy wave. "Hi," he said quietly. "Do you want to see my science project? It's about the solar system." Lily's face lit up. "We'd love to. I did a project about Saturn last year, just like that." The ice was broken. Ethan led them to a small table where a carefully constructed model of the planets hung from wire hangers. As he explained each planet's features, his voice grew more animated, his hands gesturing with excitement. Jack watched, mesmerized by every movement, every expression. The way Ethan's nose crinkled when he concentrated, that was pure Sarah. The slight dimple in his left cheek when he smiled. Jack saw himself there. "Would you like to go outside?" Mrs. Baker suggested. "It's a beautiful day for the playground." In the backyard, Jack spotted a worn baseball and glove on a bench. "Do you like to play catch?" Ethan's eyes brightened. "Yeah, but nobody here really knows how. They just want to play video games." "Well, you're in luck," Jack said, his voice rough with emotion. "I used to coach Little League." They spread out on the grass, and Jack's muscle memory took over. The familiar motion of showing Ethan how to hold the glove, how to stand ready for the ball, it felt like coming home. When Ethan caught his first throw, the boy's whole face transformed with joy. "Did you see that?" he called out to everyone. "I caught it." Lily sat cross-legged on the grass nearby, the photo album open in her lap. Between throws, Ethan would run over to look at the pictures she shared, their house, the diner, their dog Max. "You have a dog?" Ethan asked, eyes wide with wonder. "He loves kids," Lily assured him. "He's really gentle, and he knows how to shake hands." Marissa hung back, watching from a bench near the flower garden. Silent tears tracked down her cheeks, but her smile was radiant. When Ethan accidentally threw the ball her way, she caught it smoothly and tossed it back with surprising skill. "You're good at this," Ethan exclaimed. "I used to play softball," Marissa admitted. "A long time ago." The afternoon passed like a dream. They shared stories, played games, and discovered little pieces of each other. Ethan showed them his favorite hiding spot behind the big oak tree. He told them about the stray cat he'd named Professor Whiskers that sometimes visited his window. But like all dreams, this one had to end. As the sky turned soft pink and purple, Mrs. Baker appeared at the back door. "I'm sorry, everyone," she said gently. "It's almost dinner time." Ethan's face fell. He grabbed Lily's hand, his small fingers wrapping around hers tightly. "Will you come back tomorrow?" he whispered, hope and fear mingling in those familiar brown eyes. Lily looked at their father, her own eyes pleading. Jack felt his heart breaking and mending all at once. He wanted nothing more than to scoop this boy up and take him home, to never let him go again. But he knew they had to follow the rules, had to do this right. "We'll come back as soon as they let us," he promised, his voice thick with emotion. "Would you like that?" Ethan nodded vigorously. "Can you bring pictures of Max next time?" "We'll bring lots of pictures," Lily assured him, giving his hand a squeeze before letting go. They watched as Ethan walked back inside, turning once to wave before disappearing through the door. Jack stood rooted to the spot, every fiber of his being aching to follow. Marissa touched his arm gently. "He has your smile, Jack," she whispered, "and Sarah's kind heart." Jack could only nod, words failing him completely. His son was alive. His son was real and wonderful, and everything he'd ever dreamed. And somehow, impossibly, they'd found their way back to each other. As they walked back to the truck in the gathering dusk, Lily clutched the photo album to her chest once more. But now, instead of holding memories of what they'd lost, it held the promise of what they might regain. The foster home's screen door creaked shut behind them. Jack's footsteps felt heavy on the concrete path leading to his truck, each step taking him further from his son. Marissa walked beside him, her arms wrapped tightly around herself, despite the warm afternoon air. "He has Sarah's smile," Jack whispered, his voice rough with emotion. "I never thought I'd see that smile again." Marissa nodded, wiping away a tear with the back of her hand. "He's perfect, Jack. Just perfect." The drive to the courthouse was quiet, filled with the weight of what they'd just experienced. Lily had stayed behind at home, understanding that this part of the journey belonged to her father and Marissa alone. The tall brick building loomed ahead, its stone steps well worn from years of foot traffic. Inside, the fluorescent lights hummed overhead as Jack filled out form after form, his pen scratching against paper in the echoing silence of the clerk's office. Marissa sat nearby, her presence both comforting and concerning. He could feel the suspicious glances from court employees. "Mr. Reynolds," the clerk said, adjusting her glasses as she reviewed his paperwork. "There are complications. The original birth certificate, the hospital records, there are significant gaps in the documentation." Jack leaned forward, his hands flat on the counter. "But we have the DNA test results. We have Margaret's testimony about the mix-up. Sir, a verbal account from a retired nurse isn't sufficient. And these records," she shuffled through the papers, "they're incomplete. Social services will need more than this." A representative from social services arrived, a stern-faced woman with a tablet full of questions. She pulled Jack aside, her voice low but sharp. "Mr. Reynolds, are you aware of the complexity of this situation? Years have passed. The child has been in the system. And your associate." She glanced at Marissa. Her background raises serious concerns. The word associate stung. Jack straightened his shoulders. "Marissa is the reason I found my son. Without her, you wouldn't be disrupting a stable placement," the woman cut in. "We need to consider what's best for Ethan." By the time they left the courthouse, the sun was setting, casting long shadows across the parking lot. Jack's phone buzzed with messages. His sister warning him about rumors spreading through town, his cook reporting that the lunch crowd had been unusually thin. They drove past Main Street, where people quickly looked away as his truck passed. Outside his diner, a small group of regular customers huddled near the entrance, speaking in hushed tones. They scattered when Jack pulled into his parking spot. "They'll understand eventually," Marissa said softly, "once they see the truth." Jack nodded, but his heart felt heavy. Inside the diner, the evening shift manager handed him the day's receipts. The numbers were down by half. While counting the till, he overheard whispers from the kitchen. "Poor Jack's lost his mind. That homeless woman's got him fooled. What about poor Lily?" The next few hours passed in a blur of forced smiles and avoided gazes. Regular customers who'd eaten at his diner for years suddenly found reasons to eat elsewhere. A few loyal patrons remained, including Margaret, who came in for her usual evening coffee and squeezed Jack's hand in silent support. As closing time approached, Marissa helped clean tables while Jack reconciled the day's accounts. The numbers were grim, but he tried not to let it show on his face. Through the window, he watched teenagers on bikes pass by, pointing and whispering. It was Marissa who noticed it first. She gasped, drawing Jack's attention to the front window. In harsh red letters, someone had spray-painted "Crazy Fool" across the diner's white exterior wall. Jack's jaw clenched as he grabbed cleaning supplies from under the counter. Outside, the night air had turned cool, but he barely noticed as he scrubbed at the cruel words. Marissa appeared beside him with another brush and a bucket of soapy water. "You don't have to help," he said, his voice tight. "Yes, I do." She dipped her brush in the water and began scrubbing alongside him. "We're in this together." The red paint was stubborn, requiring intense pressure to remove. Jack's arms ached, but he kept scrubbing, each stroke fueled by determination. Marissa worked quietly beside him, her presence a reminder of why they were fighting. "They think I'm crazy," Jack said, pausing to wipe sweat from his forehead. "Maybe I am, believing in impossible things." "Faith isn't crazy," Marissa replied, her voice soft but firm. "Neither is love." She attacked another section of the graffiti with renewed vigor. "We'll prove them wrong, Jack, we will." The words hung in the night air between them as they continued their work, the sound of bristles against brick, the only noise in the empty parking lot. Together, they erased the visible sign of town's judgment, though they both knew the real battle was just beginning. The morning sun hadn't yet burned through the fog when two police cruisers pulled into Jack's gravel driveway. He was at the kitchen sink, washing breakfast dishes, when the sharp knock came at the door. His stomach dropped at the sight of the officers through the window. "Mr. Reynolds?" the taller officer asked, his badge glinting in the early light. "I'm Officer Martinez. This is Officer Chen. We need to discuss Marissa Coleman." Jack wiped his hands on a dish towel, his throat tight. "What about her? Are you aware she has a criminal record?" Officer Chen held up a manila folder. "Multiple drug charges from 3 years ago. Possession with intent to distribute." The words hit Jack like a physical blow. He gripped the doorframe, thinking of Ethan, of all they'd built. Behind him, he heard footsteps. Marissa had come downstairs. "I can explain," she said, her voice barely a whisper. Officer Martinez's expression softened slightly. "Ma'am, with your history, being involved in a custody case could be problematic." Marissa's hands trembled as she stepped forward. "Please, just let me tell the truth. All of it." Jack led everyone to the living room, where morning light filtered through lace curtains his wife had hung years ago. Lily appeared at the top of the stairs, her face pale with worry. "It was Marcus, my ex," Marissa began, perched on the edge of the couch. "I was young, scared, working at the hospital. Her voice cracked. "He said he'd hurt me if I didn't hold his drugs. Said he'd make sure I lost my job, that no one would believe me." Jack watched her hands twist in her lap, remembered how they'd gently held Ethan's blanket that first night. "I tried to leave him 3 times. Tears slid down Marissa's cheeks. "The 3rd time he planted drugs in my car and called the police himself. I had no proof it was his. No one believed me over him. He was charming, well-dressed. I was just the nervous girlfriend with a minimum wage job." Officer Chen made notes, while Martinez watched with practiced neutrality. Jack felt the weight of every heartbeat, every breath in the quiet room. "After I got out of jail," Marissa continued, "I went to rehab, even though I'd never used. I needed help dealing with the trauma, with feeling so worthless. That's where I found God again, where I learned to forgive myself for being too afraid to fight back." Lily had crept down the stairs, her face fierce with emotion. "Dad, you can't let this change things. You've always taught me about redemption, about second chances." "Lily, please," Jack said. But his daughter wasn't finished. "No? Remember when Tommy Miller's dad got out of prison? The whole town whispered, but you gave him a job at the diner. You said everyone deserves a chance to prove they've changed." Jack closed his eyes, remembering. Tommy's father had become one of his most reliable employees, had turned his life around completely. "Your daughter makes a fair point, Mr. Reynolds," Officer Martinez said quietly. "But you should know, this could affect the custody case for Ethan. The court will look at everyone involved." Marissa stood suddenly, her voice stronger despite her tears. "I'll leave. I won't let my past hurt Ethan's chances of being with his real family. I had to make things right. Had to help find him." "Sit down," Jack said, surprising himself with the firmness in his voice. "You're not going anywhere." The officers exchanged glances. "We'll need to file a report about this," Chen said, "but nothing requires immediate action. Just be prepared for questions during the custody hearing." After the police left, silence filled the house like smoke. Lily hugged Marissa fiercely, whispering something Jack couldn't hear. Then she grabbed her backpack for school, squeezing her father's hand as she passed. "I trusted you," Jack said finally, when he and Marissa were alone. The words came out rougher than he meant. "I know." Marissa's voice was hollow. "I should have told you everything that first day, but I was so afraid you wouldn't believe the truth, that you'd see me like everyone else did." "What is the truth?" Jack asked. "All of it." For the next hour, Marissa told him everything. About growing up in foster homes herself. About meeting Marcus when she was young and desperate for love. About the manipulation, the isolation, the fear. About finding the hospital records during her night shift, trying to report the mix-up, and being dismissed as troubled. When Marcus found out I was asking questions about the baby switch, he got angry. Said I was drawing attention we didn't need. That's when he set me up. She wiped her eyes. "After rehab, I spent years tracking down leads about Ethan. It became my purpose, making right what went wrong that night." Jack stood up abruptly, needed air. The morning had grown warm and sticky, but he walked out to the porch anyway. The old swing creaked as he sat down, his head in his hands. The crunch of gravel told him Marissa had followed. "I'll go pack my things," she said softly. "Did you mean it?" Jack asked without looking up. "About finding God again?" "Yes." Her voice was steady now. "He was there in my darkest moments. When I had nothing left, he gave me hope. Gave me strength to keep searching for Ethan." Jack lifted his face to the sky, remembering countless nights spent asking God why he'd taken his son. Now, facing the possibility that Ethan was alive, he was asking different questions. Marissa turned to go inside but paused. "Thank you, Jack, for showing me kindness when most people wouldn't. For letting me be part of finding Ethan. I'm sorry I didn't tell you everything sooner." Jack waited until he heard the screen door close behind her. The morning birds were singing, oblivious to human troubles. The same stars he'd prayed under for years were fading into the brightening sky. "Sarah," he whispered his late wife's name. "What am I supposed to do?" The porch swing creaked gently in the morning breeze, offering no answers. The manila envelope lay on Jack's kitchen table like a bomb waiting to explode. His coffee had gone cold, untouched, as he read and reread the official letter for the 10th time. The foster family, the Hendersons, had filed adoption papers for Ethan, his son, his miracle. Marissa sat across from him, her hands clasped so tightly her knuckles had turned white. "There has to be something we can do," she whispered, her voice trembling. "We can't let them." "We?" Jack's voice came out harsher than he'd intended. He pushed back from the table, the chair legs scraping against the linoleum. "There wouldn't be a we in this mess if you'd been honest from the start." Lily, who had been quietly doing homework at the counter, looked up sharply. "Dad, don't." But the dam had broken. Weeks of stress, doubt, and town gossip came flooding out. If you'd come clean about your past right away, maybe they'd be taking us seriously now. Instead, every time we go to court, they bring up your record, your lies. "I never lied." Marissa stood up, her eyes flashing. "I told you everything when I was ready, when I thought you'd understand." Her voice cracked. "I trusted you to understand." "Understand what? That you kept secrets that could cost me my son? He wouldn't even be in your life if it wasn't for me." Marissa's voice rose. I'm the one who found him. I'm the one who's been searching for years, while I what? Jack stepped toward her, his face flushed. While I grieved? While I raised Lily alone? While I believed my boy was dead? Stop it, Lily shouted, slamming her textbook shut. Both of you, just stop! But they were too far gone, the hurt too raw. You think I wanted this? Marissa gestured wildly at the envelope. You think I wanted to bring pain back into your life? I came to you because I thought you'd fight for him. Instead, you're ready to give up at the first roadblock. Roadblock? Jack laughed bitterly. The Hendersons have a spotless record, a stable home. Meanwhile, I'm the fool who let a... He caught himself, but not soon enough. Go ahead. Marissa's voice was deadly quiet. Say it? A criminal? A junkie? That's what everyone in town is calling me, isn't it? I didn't mean... Yes, you did. Tears spilled down Marissa's cheeks. You're just like everyone else. The minute things get hard, you look at my past and decide that's all I am. Lily suddenly bolted from her chair, sobbing. I can't listen to this anymore. She ran upstairs, her footsteps thundering on the stairs, followed by the slam of her bedroom door. The sound seemed to snap Jack back to reality. He rubbed his face, looking older than his years. Lily! She's terrified, Marissa said softly. She's watching her brother slip away again, and instead of fighting for him, we're fighting each other. What do you expect me to do? Jack's voice was hollow. The Hendersons have money, influence. They've been Ethan's family for years. So, we give up? After everything? Marissa reached for the tattered blanket she always kept close. This blanket led me to you. To him. It has to mean something. Maybe it means we were meant to find him, but not keep him. Jack couldn't meet her eyes. Maybe this is God's way of telling us to let go. No. Marissa shook her head fiercely. God didn't bring us this far for nothing. The Jack Reynolds I met behind that diner wouldn't quit. He took in a stranger because he believed in impossible things. That Jack Reynolds was naive. That Jack Reynolds had faith? Thunder rumbled outside as rain began to fall. But you're right about one thing. Maybe there shouldn't be a we in this anymore. She clutched the blanket to her chest and walked to the door. Jack watched her, words of apology stuck in his throat. Marissa, she paused, hand on the doorknob. You know what's funny? When everyone else saw a homeless woman in a dumpster, you saw a person worth helping. But now that I've actually helped you find your son, you can't see past my mistakes. The rain was falling harder now, drumming against the windows. Marissa opened the door, letting in a gust of cold air. Where will you go? Jack asked. Does it matter? She stepped out into the storm. You've already decided. I'm not worth the fight. Jack walked numbly to his diner next door, the argument replaying in his mind. The bell chimed as he entered, but instead of its usual cheerful tone, it sounded like a funeral toll. He flipped the sign to closed and slammed the door shut, watching through rain-streaked windows as Marissa disappeared into the storm, nothing but a baby blanket held tight against her heart. Rain drummed against the diner's windows as Jack Reynolds stood alone in the darkened restaurant. The chairs were already up on the tables, and the floor gleamed from its nightly mopping, but he couldn't bring himself to leave. The letter from social services burned in his pocket like a hot coal. His legs gave way beneath him, and he sank to his knees on the cold tile floor. The familiar scent of coffee and pie couldn't mask the emptiness that threatened to swallow him whole. Please, he whispered, his voice cracking. Please, God, don't take him from me again. His shoulders shook as tears fell freely now. I can't lose him twice. I can't. Lightning flashed outside, illuminating the empty booths where he'd imagined Ethan sitting, sharing breakfast with Lily, being part of their family again. The thunder that followed seemed to mock his prayers. I know I pushed her away, Jack admitted, wiping his eyes with trembling hands. I know I let fear win, but Marissa, she was just trying to help, and now... His words dissolved into quiet sobs. Across town, huddled beneath the concrete steps of First Baptist Church, Marissa Coleman pulled her thin jacket tighter around her shoulders. The old familiar chill of homelessness had settled back into her bones, but it wasn't the cold that kept her awake. Father, she whispered into the darkness, I'm sorry. I'm sorry I wasn't strong enough, wasn't good enough." Rain dripped from the edge of the steps, creating a curtain of water around her makeshift shelter. "I just wanted to make things right. To help that little boy find his real family." She touched the worn baby blanket she still carried, tracing Ethan's name with her finger. "Please watch over him. Over all of them. Jack, Lily." Her voice caught. "They deserve better than what I brought into their lives." The sound of approaching footsteps made her tense, ready to run if needed. But then a familiar voice called out softly, "Marissa, are you there?" Lily Reynolds stood in the rain, holding an umbrella and wearing her father's old raincoat. Her long brown hair was damp despite the umbrella, and her eyes were red from crying. "Lily?" Marissa's voice was hoarse. "You shouldn't be out here, honey. It's late." "Neither should you." Lily crouched down, her face set with the same determination her father often showed. "Come home with me." Marissa shook her head. "Your father made it clear. Dad's hurting." Lily interrupted. "He's scared. But that doesn't make him right." She reached out her hand. "Please, you're family now, whether he likes it or not." The word family hit Marissa like a physical blow. Tears welled up in her eyes as she looked at this brave young girl who reminded her so much of herself at that age, before life had turned harsh and cruel. "I don't deserve." "Stop that," Lily said firmly. "Everyone deserves family. Everyone deserves a second chance." She didn't withdraw her outstretched hand. "Even Dad knows that, deep down. He's just forgotten for a minute." The rain continued to fall as Marissa hesitated, looking at Lily's offered hand like it might disappear if she reached for it. Finally, with trembling fingers, she took it. Together they walked through the wet streets, sharing the umbrella. Lily kept her arm linked with Marissa's, as if afraid she might try to run away again. Neither spoke much, but the silence was comfortable, filled with understanding. When they reached the Reynolds house, all the lights were off except for the porch light. Jack signaled that he was still at the diner. Lily unlocked the door and led Marissa inside, helping her out of her wet jacket. "I'll make some hot chocolate," Lily announced, heading for the kitchen. "And don't even think about leaving. I'm not above calling the police to report a missing person." Marissa couldn't help but smile at that, even as she dabbed at her eyes with her sleeve. She settled onto the familiar couch, where just days ago she had sat with Jack, planning their search for Ethan. The memory ached. The house was quiet, except for the sounds of Lily moving around in the kitchen, the clink of mugs, the whir of the microwave. Marissa found herself looking at the family photos on the wall. Jack and his late wife on their wedding day, Lily as a toddler, and one precious photo of infant Ethan that they'd discovered in their research. The front door opened, and Jack stepped in, shaking rain from his coat. He stopped short when he saw Marissa on the couch. His face showed a storm of emotions: surprise, uncertainty, lingering anger, and something else, something softer. Lily emerged from the kitchen holding 3 steaming mugs. She looked between her father and Marissa, chin raised slightly in defiance. "I made hot chocolate," she said simply, as if this was any normal evening. Jack stood frozen for a moment longer, then slowly removed his wet coat. His eyes never left Marissa's face, taking in her damp clothes, the dark circles under her eyes, the way she seemed to be trying to make herself smaller on the couch. Lily set the mugs down on the coffee table and sat next to Marissa, close enough that their shoulders touched. The gesture was clear. She had chosen her side. In that moment, something shifted in Jack's expression. Perhaps it was seeing his daughter's unwavering compassion, or maybe it was the way Marissa's hand protectively rested on Lily's arm, the same protective instinct he'd seen her show toward Ethan. Whatever the reason, his face softened, and his shoulders slumped slightly. Looking at them together on his couch, his fierce, loving daughter and this broken but resilient woman who had brought both chaos and hope into their lives, Jack finally saw what had been there all along. They weren't just 2 separate people anymore. Somehow, through all the pain and fear and hope, they had become something more. They had become family. Morning sunlight streamed through Jack's kitchen window, casting long shadows across the worn linoleum floor. He sat at the table, his coffee growing cold, staring at the phone in front of him. Marissa and Lily were still asleep upstairs, their soft footsteps occasionally creaking through the ceiling. The words from last night's prayer still echoed in his mind. After seeing Lily and Marissa together, something had shifted inside him. They weren't just two broken people anymore. They were becoming family. Jack picked up the phone and dialed his lawyer's number. "Tom, we need to move forward. All of us. Together." Within hours, their small living room became a makeshift war room. Tom sat in Jack's old armchair, his briefcase open on the coffee table. Marissa perched nervously on the edge of the couch, while Lily sat close beside her, their shoulders touching. "It won't be easy," Tom warned, shuffling through papers. "The court looks at everything: character witnesses, history, stability." "Then we'll show them everything," Jack said firmly. He turned to Marissa. "No more hiding, no more shame. We tell the whole truth." Tears welled in Marissa's eyes. "Even about my past?" "Especially about your past," Jack replied softly. "Because it shows how far you've come." The next few days passed in a blur of activity. Word spread through their small town like wildfire. Some folks crossed the street when they saw Jack coming, whispering about his foolishness. But others, especially from their church, stepped forward with surprising strength. Mrs. Baker, who'd been coming to the diner for 20 years, wrote a passionate letter about Jack's character. "That man," she wrote, "has served this community with nothing but kindness and integrity. If he believes in this cause, so do I." Pastor Mike visited personally, bringing with him a stack of testimonials from congregation members who'd witnessed Marissa's transformation. "They've seen how she prays with others after service," he told Jack. "How she helps clean the church nursery. These aren't the actions of someone trying to deceive." But their strongest ally proved to be Margaret Hughes. The retired nurse arrived at Jack's house one evening, her gray hair neat under her Sunday hat, her spine straight as steel. "I've carried this secret too long," she declared, settling into Jack's kitchen chair. "I was there that night. I saw what happened with those babies." Her hands trembled as she sipped her tea. "The hospital wanted to avoid a scandal. They made us all stay quiet. But I can't be quiet anymore." Jack reached across the table and squeezed her hand. "Thank you, Margaret." Marissa, who'd been listening from the doorway, stepped forward. "Why help us now?" Margaret's eyes softened. "Because sometimes God gives us second chances to do what's right. And this time, I'm taking it." The morning of the court hearing dawned clear and cool. Jack stood in front of his mirror, adjusting his tie, the one his wife had given him years ago. Lily appeared in his doorway, already dressed in her best blue dress. "Dad," she said softly, "whatever happens today, I'm proud of you." Downstairs, they found Marissa in the living room, clutching Ethan's blanket. She wore a borrowed dress from one of the church ladies, and her hair was neatly braided. She looked terrified. "I don't know if I can do this," she whispered. Jack knelt beside her chair. "Remember what you told me about faith? About how God doesn't waste our pain?" He gently touched the blanket in her hands. "This blanket led you to us for a reason. Now it's time to trust that reason." They drove to the courthouse in silence. Already, a small crowd had gathered on the steps. Jack recognized faces from the diner, from church, from around town. Some smiled encouragingly. Others looked away. Margaret stood near the entrance, straight and dignified in her best suit. Pastor Mike was there too, along with a handful of church members. Even Mrs. Baker had come, despite her arthritis, leaning on her daughter's arm. As they climbed the courthouse steps, Jack felt the weight of every eye upon them. But when he looked at Marissa, he saw not the homeless woman from behind his diner, but a fighter who'd never given up on finding the truth. They paused at the top of the steps. The heavy wooden doors loomed before them, and beyond them lay their chance to make things right, to bring Ethan home, to heal old wounds, to prove that sometimes the most unlikely people could become family. Marissa's hand trembled in his. But she didn't pull away. The courtroom's polished wooden benches creaked under the weight of what felt like half the town. Sunlight filtered through tall windows, casting long shadows across the floor as lawyers shuffled papers and whispered urgently to their clients. Jack tugged at his tie. He'd borrowed it from his church friend Tom, while Marissa sat beside him in a modest navy dress donated by the pastor's wife. Social services attorney, Mr. Peterson, stood at his podium, his voice sharp and clinical. Your Honor, while we sympathize with Mr. Reynolds' situation, we must consider the stability of the child. Miss Coleman's history raises serious concerns about her involvement. Jack's lawyer, Sarah Matthews, countered immediately. The DNA evidence is conclusive, Your Honor. This is Mr. Reynolds' biological son, separated by a hospital error that was covered up for years. The judge, an older woman with steel gray hair and kind eyes, adjusted her glasses. I'd like to hear from Miss Coleman directly. Marissa's hands trembled as she rose. Her voice came out barely above a whisper at first, but grew stronger with each word. Your Honor, I know my past looks terrible on paper. I was young, scared, and trapped in an abusive relationship with a man who dealt drugs. She paused, taking a shaky breath. Jack noticed how her fingers unconsciously traced the cross pendant at her neck, a gift from Lily last Sunday. He threatened to hurt me if I didn't take the fall for his crimes. I ended up with a record, but that wasn't the real me. When I got out, I found God. He gave me strength to stay clean, to rebuild my life. Tears glistened in her eyes, but she stood straighter. Working at that hospital, even as a janitor, I overheard things. When I realized what had happened with baby Ethan, I couldn't stay silent. I lost my job for speaking up, but I kept searching because every child deserves to know their real family. Whispers rippled through the gallery. Jack saw several church members nodding, including Margaret, the retired nurse who'd helped them uncover the truth. Mr. Peterson's voice cut through the murmurs. And yet, you were living behind a dumpster when Mr. Reynolds found you. How can we trust your judgment around a child? Objection, Your Honor, Sarah interjected, badgering the witness. Sustained, the judge replied firmly. Marissa's voice grew stronger. I lost everything standing up to my ex. But I never lost my faith or my determination to make things right. I'm not asking to be Ethan's mother. I just want to help him find his way home to his real family. The judge turned to Jack. Mr. Reynolds, would you like to address the court? Jack stood slowly, his heart pounding. He'd practiced this speech all night, but now the words felt different, more urgent. Your Honor, 15 years ago, I lost my wife, and what I thought was my son, in the same week. I've spent every day since then trying to be worthy of their memory. He gestured to Marissa. When this woman showed up with my son's blanket, I thought she was crazy or trying to scam me, but she showed me something I'd forgotten. That God works in mysterious ways, often through the people we're quickest to judge. Jack's voice cracked slightly. My daughter Lily is 16 now. She never got to know her brother, but in just these few weeks of visiting Ethan at the foster home, I've seen my late wife's smile on his face. I've heard him laugh the same way she used to laugh. The gallery had gone completely silent. Even Mr. Peterson had stopped shuffling his papers. Your Honor, I'm not perfect. I'm just a diner owner trying to make honest food and raise my daughter right. But Ethan is my son. The DNA proves it. And Marissa. He turned to look at her, seeing the tears streaming down her face. She's not the person in those old police reports. She's the person who gave up everything to help a stranger find his lost child. That's the kind of person I want in my son's life. Margaret stood up from the gallery. Your Honor, if I may. At the judge's nod, she continued. I was there that night, 15 years ago. The hospital tried to bury their mistake, but Miss Coleman was right all along. That took incredible courage. The judge removed her glasses, studying the faces before her. The tension in the room was thick enough to cut with a knife. After what felt like hours, she picked up her gavel. This court has seen overwhelming evidence of both a grave institutional error and extraordinary personal courage in correcting it. While Miss Coleman's past is concerning, her actions in bringing this truth to light speak to genuine reformation. She leaned forward. Mr. Reynolds, I am granting you temporary guardianship of Ethan, pending a 6-month review period. During this time, Miss Coleman will be permitted supervised visitation and involvement in Ethan's life, provided she maintains her current path of stability. The gavel cracked down with finality. Court is adjourned. The sound echoed through the stunned courtroom, like a thunderclap of hope. The morning sun painted golden streaks across the driveway of the foster home as Jack's old pickup truck rumbled to a stop. His hands trembled slightly on the steering wheel, while Lily bounced with nervous energy in the passenger seat. In the back, Marissa smoothed the carefully folded blanket in her lap for what must have been the 100th time. "This is it," Jack whispered, his voice thick with emotion. After weeks of legal battles and countless prayers, they were finally here to bring Ethan home, even if just temporarily, while the full case proceeded. Mrs. Bennett, Ethan's foster mother, stood on the front porch with Ethan beside her. The boy wore a backpack that seemed too big for his small frame, his brown eyes wide with a mix of excitement and uncertainty. Jack's heart squeezed at how much those eyes reminded him of his late wife's. Lily was out of the truck before it fully stopped, her long brown hair flying behind her as she raced up the path. "Ethan!" she called out, her voice carrying all the joy and love she'd stored up over years of missing her brother. Ethan's face lit up like a Christmas tree. "Lily!" He broke away from Mrs. Bennett and sprinted down the steps, his backpack bouncing wildly. The siblings collided in a tangle of laughter and hugs, Lily wrapping her arms around him so tightly it seemed she'd never let go. Jack climbed out slowly, his legs feeling oddly weak. Marissa emerged too, holding the precious blanket close to her chest like a shield. They watched the reunion, both trying to hold back tears. "I packed all his favorite things," Mrs. Bennett said softly, walking down to meet them. "He's been talking about nothing else since we told him yesterday." She smiled warmly at Jack. "He's a special boy. You're blessed to have found each other again." Jack nodded, unable to speak for a moment. He watched as Ethan and Lily chattered excitedly, the boy pointing to his backpack, probably explaining about his treasured possessions inside. Finally finding his voice, Jack walked over and knelt down in front of his son. His son, the words still felt like a miracle in his mind. Ethan turned to face him, suddenly shy again, but his eyes held trust. "Hey, buddy," Jack said gently, his voice cracking slightly. He reached out slowly, giving Ethan time to accept or reject the gesture. The boy stepped forward into his arms. "I want you to know something really important." He pulled back just enough to look into Ethan's eyes. "I promise you, right here and now, that I will never leave you again. Not ever." Ethan's lower lip trembled. "Really? Forever and ever?" "Forever and ever," Jack confirmed, pulling him close again. He breathed in the scent of his son's hair, remembering those precious few days when Ethan was a newborn. How had he lived without this for so long? Marissa approached carefully, still clutching the blanket. She knelt down beside them, her eyes shining with unshed tears. "Ethan," she said softly, "I've been keeping something safe for you." She held out the blanket, the very thing that had started this whole journey, that had brought them all together. Ethan reached out to touch it, his small fingers tracing the embroidered letters of his name. "This was mine?" "Yes," Marissa smiled. "I've protected it for a long time, waiting for the day I could give it back to you." Ethan took the blanket, holding it close to his chest. He looked at Marissa with such innocent wisdom that it made Jack's heart ache. "You're the angel lady," he said suddenly. Marissa blinked in surprise. "What do you mean, sweetie?" "I had dreams sometimes," Ethan explained, "about an angel who sang to me when I was really little. She had a soft voice like yours." He stepped closer to her. "Can I call you Aunt Rissa?" Marissa's tears finally spilled over. "Of course you can, precious boy." She opened her arms, and Ethan stepped into them, still clutching his blanket. Jack watched them, remembering how he'd first found Marissa behind his diner, how he'd almost called the police, how close he'd come to missing this miracle. God worked in mysterious ways indeed. Lily joined their little circle, wrapping her arms around both Ethan and Marissa. "Group hug," she declared, making Ethan giggle. After saying goodbye to Mrs. Bennett and loading Ethan's belongings into the truck, they all climbed in. Jack adjusted the rearview mirror, watching as Lily helped Ethan buckle his seatbelt. The blanket lay across his lap like a treasure. As they drove away from the foster home, Lily pointed out landmarks to her brother. "That's where we get ice cream sometimes," she said, indicating a small shop. "And over there is our church. You'll love the Sunday school teacher, Miss Sarah." Ethan's eyes grew heavy as they drove, the excitement of the morning catching up with him. His head slowly drooped onto Lily's shoulder, and his small hand found hers, holding it tight even in sleep. The blanket rose and fell with his steady breathing. Jack glanced in the rearview mirror again, his vision blurring with tears as he took in the scene. His children, both of them, together, at last. Marissa sat quietly in the passenger seat, her presence a reminder of how God could turn even the darkest circumstances into blessings. Through the windshield, the road stretched ahead toward home, toward their future together. Jack blinked rapidly, clearing his eyes to focus on driving, but his heart felt so full it might burst. The truck hummed steadily beneath them as they made their way through the familiar streets of their small town. Ethan slept peacefully in the back seat, still holding Lily's hand, finally heading home where he belonged. The evening sun cast long shadows through the windows of Reynolds' diner, painting warm stripes across the freshly polished floors. Jack had spent the morning rearranging tables into long rows, creating one continuous stretch of seating that turned his modest establishment into something that felt more like a community hall. The aroma of roasting turkey and apple pie filled the air, mixing with the sounds of clattering dishes and quiet conversation. "Is this enough napkins, Dad?" Ethan asked, his arms full of neatly folded paper squares. He'd been eager to help since the moment Jack mentioned hosting a free community dinner. Jack ruffled his son's hair, marveling at how natural it felt after just a few days. "That's perfect, buddy. Why don't you put them at each place setting?" From the kitchen, Marissa emerged carrying a stack of plates, her face flushed from the heat of the ovens but wearing a contented smile. She'd been up since dawn, baking pies and preparing side dishes, insisting on contributing despite Jack's protests that she should rest. "The green beans are almost ready," she announced, setting down the plates. "And the rolls should be done in about 10 minutes. Lily burst through the front door, her church choir robe draped over one arm. "Pastor Mike says they'll be here in 15 minutes. She paused to help Ethan with the napkins, showing him how to fold them into triangles. "And Mrs. Thompson is bringing her famous potato salad." Jack watched his children work together, their easy companionship making his heart swell. Just a week ago, this diner had felt empty, haunted by whispers and judgment. Now, it hummed with possibility. The first guests began arriving just as the sun dipped below the horizon. They entered hesitantly at first, the same people who had avoided the diner during the custody battle, who had shaken their heads at Jack's foolishness. But the warm light and delicious smells drew them in, along with Jack's firm handshake and genuine welcome at the door. "Beautiful evening for a gathering," Margaret, the retired nurse who had helped them uncover the truth, said as she entered. She handed Jack a casserole dish. "I brought my grandmother's recipe. Thought it might help break the ice." More people filtered in, factory workers still in their uniforms, farmers with weathered hands and kind eyes, young families with children who immediately gravitated toward Ethan. The church choir arrived in their robes, led by Pastor Mike, who carried his guitar case. Lily joined her choir members near the counter, their voices rising in soft harmony as they practiced. The sound drew smiles from the gathering crowd, and Jack noticed several people wiping away tears when they sang "Amazing Grace." In the kitchen, Marissa worked steadily, her movements graceful and sure as she arranged food on serving platters. When she emerged to set them on the buffet table, a few women who had once crossed the street to avoid her approached tentatively. "Could we help with anything?" Mrs. Anderson asked, twisting her hands nervously. Marissa's smile was radiant. "Of course, the pies need slicing if you'd like to join me." Soon the kitchen filled with women working together, their initial awkwardness melting into comfortable chatter and occasional laughter. Jack caught snippets of conversation, Marissa sharing her pie crust secret, the others asking about her prayers, her faith, her journey. Ethan darted between tables, proudly carrying plates of pie to the guests. "Would you like apple or cherry?" he asked each person, beaming when they complimented his serving skills. Some of the older residents did double takes, recognizing Jack's late wife's features in the boy's face. "He has Sarah's eyes," Jack overheard Mr. Wilson telling his wife. "The Lord does work in mysterious ways." The diner buzzed with conversation and the clinking of silverware. Old grievances seemed to dissolve in the warm atmosphere. Even Tom Harper, who had painted that cruel graffiti on the diner wall, approached Jack with shoulders hunched. "I was wrong," Tom said gruffly, extending his hand. "About everything. I hope you can forgive me." Jack clasped his hand firmly. "Already forgotten. Have some turkey." Marissa made the gravy from scratch. As the evening progressed, the choir sang several more songs, their voices filling the diner with joy. Lily's clear soprano soared above the others, and Jack noticed how Ethan watched his sister with pure adoration. During a break, she taught him the hand motions to "This Little Light of Mine," both of them giggling as they practiced. Marissa emerged from the kitchen again, this time without an armload of dishes. She stood quietly near the counter, watching the scene with glistening eyes. Several people stopped to speak with her, offering words of encouragement and support. The transformation from outcast to accepted member of the community was happening before Jack's eyes. Looking around at his full diner, at the faces of neighbors and friends both old and new, Jack felt a deep sense of rightness settle in his chest. This was what community should be. Not judgment and whispers, but acceptance and second chances. He picked up his water glass and a spoon, tapping them together gently. The conversations quieted as people turned to face him. Ethan scurried to stand beside him, and Lily moved closer too, slipping her hand into her brother's. Marissa remained near the counter, but her presence was just as much a part of this moment. Jack cleared his throat, suddenly emotional at the sight of so many expectant faces. "I want to thank you all for coming tonight," he began. "These past few months have taught me something important about family." He paused, looking at his children, at Marissa, at the community gathered before him. "Family is bigger than blood. It's love, grace, and second chances." A murmur of agreement rippled through the crowd, accompanied by nods and gentle smiles. Some reached out to squeeze their neighbors' hands or pat nearby shoulders. The division that had threatened to tear their community apart seemed to heal a little more with each gesture of kindness. The noise of conversation rose again, warmer and more animated than before. Ethan resumed his pie delivery duties, while Lily rejoined the choir for another song. Marissa disappeared back into the kitchen, but this time she was followed by a stream of volunteers eager to help with cleanup. The late afternoon breeze whispered through the oak trees, rustling their leaves in a gentle symphony. Jack Reynolds pulled his pickup truck into the cemetery's gravel path, the wheels crunching softly beneath them. In the back seat, Ethan clutched the checkered picnic blanket to his chest, while Lily balanced a wicker basket filled with sandwiches and lemonade. Marissa sat quietly in the passenger seat, a bouquet of fresh wildflowers resting in her lap. "Is this where Mom is?" Ethan asked softly, his eyes wide as he took in the peaceful rows of headstones stretching across the rolling hills. Jack nodded, his throat tight. "Yes, son, right under that big oak tree she always loved." They walked together along the narrow path, their footsteps falling into a natural rhythm. Lily reached for Ethan's hand, giving it a gentle squeeze. The boy had been with them for 3 weeks now, and each day brought new moments of connection, of healing, of family being rebuilt piece by piece. When they reached Sarah Reynolds' headstone, Jack knelt down and brushed away some fallen leaves. The polished granite gleamed in the late afternoon sun, her name etched deep and clear. Sarah Elizabeth Reynolds, beloved wife and mother. "Hi, Sarah," Jack whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "I brought someone special to meet you today." Ethan stepped forward slowly, his small hand still clasped in Lily's. His eyes traced the letters on the stone, and Jack saw him mouthing the words silently. "This is your mom, buddy," Jack said, pulling Ethan close. "She had the same smile you do, bright enough to light up a room. And she loved to sing while she cooked, just like you do." Marissa spread the picnic blanket nearby, smoothing it with careful hands. She moved with quiet grace, giving the family space while staying close enough to offer support. Lily helped her arrange the food, setting out paper plates and cups with practiced ease. "Tell me more about her," Ethan said, settling cross-legged on the blanket. His eyes never left the headstone. Jack smiled, memories washing over him like warm sunshine. "She made the best chocolate chip cookies in town, always put extra chips in, saying life needed more sweetness. And when you were just a tiny baby, she'd sing, "You Are My Sunshine," every night while rocking you to sleep. I remember that song, Lily chimed in, her eyes brightening. Dad used to sing it to me too. Marissa stepped forward with her wildflowers, laying them gently at the base of the headstone. Thank you, she whispered, so softly only the wind could hear. Thank you for watching over them, for helping guide us all together. They shared their picnic as Jack told stories about Sarah, how she'd dance in the kitchen on rainy days, how she volunteered at the church nursery every Sunday, how her laugh could make everyone around her smile. Ethan soaked up every word, occasionally asking questions that showed just how carefully he was listening. She would have been so proud of you both, Jack said, looking at his children. And so grateful for you, Marissa, for keeping hope alive when the rest of us had lost it. Lily suddenly jumped up, rummaging in her backpack. Wait, I brought something! She pulled out an old Polaroid camera, the kind that printed photos instantly. We should take a picture, our first real family photo. They gathered together near the headstone, arranging themselves naturally. Jack knelt behind Ethan, one hand on his son's shoulder. Lily stood next to them, her arm linked through Marissa's. The camera's timer blinked, and then there was a soft click and whir. Lily grabbed the developing photo, shaking it gently as they all watched the image slowly appear. There they were, smiling together in the golden afternoon light, with Sarah's headstone visible behind them. A reminder that love never truly dies, it just takes new forms. Can I have a copy for my room? Ethan asked hopefully. We'll make copies for everyone, Jack promised, his heart full as he watched his son trace the edges of the photo with gentle fingers. The sun began its slow descent toward the horizon, painting the sky in brilliant shades of pink and gold. Ethan and Lily had wandered a few steps away, pointing out interesting shapes in the clouds. Marissa was carefully packing up the picnic supplies, humming softly to herself. Jack stood before Sarah's headstone one last time, taking in the peaceful scene around him. His family, broken and rebuilt, lost and found, stronger now for having been tested, laughed and chatted nearby. The sound carried across the cemetery grounds, full of joy and life and hope. Thank you for sending me a miracle, he whispered to the wind, his eyes misting over. Even if it came from a dumpster. He chuckled softly, knowing Sarah would have appreciated the strange poetry of it all. The breeze picked up, carrying their laughter across the field as the day's light faded into dusk. In that moment, surrounded by the family he'd thought forever broken, Jack felt Sarah's presence more strongly than ever before, not in grief or loss, but in the pure joy of love restored. What would you do if you were in their place? Comment your answer below, and let's see how you'd rewrite the ending. If you enjoyed the story of Jack Reynolds, I handpicked the next story that you will enjoy. Please don't miss this one. Click here to watch it.